Activist and absolutely brilliant author Igor Volsky joins us today to talk about how to take down the NRA. You're going to want to check this out. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ding the bell, and leave your comments. With you, one of the book reports that we recorded it this morning, actually, is Igor Volsky's new book, Guns Down, How to Defeat the NRA and Build a Safer Culture with Fewer Guns. And to our great pleasure, on the line with, and to our great benefit, on the line with us is Igor Volsky himself, the executive director of Guns Down America, gunsdownamerica.org, and the website, the book, of course, Guns Down. The website for that is gunsdownbook.com. And, of course, you can tweet Igor at IGORVOLSKY or at Guns Down America. Igor, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tom. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. So how do we defeat the NRA and build a safer future with fewer guns? I think the predicate of this, that fewer guns means a safer America, has been largely established, although you might want to recap that very quickly. And the other predicate, that the NRA requires defeating, speak to why that is necessary. Let's start with those 2 points.
Yeah, well, look, I think the big point here in terms of how do you defeat the NRA is really on us. And what I mean by that is, you know, for years, advocates of gun control, politicians who supported gun control really pushed incremental reforms that focused on appealing to a magical moderate voter and talked about maybe a little bit of background checks, maybe we could limit some kind of the most deadly weapons. But what's clear in the research, and you allude to this, is that where there are more guns, there are more gun deaths of every kind, from suicides to homicides to accidental shootings to police shootings, both you shooting at police and police shooting at you. And, you know, of course, you look all around the world and you see the way countries have reduced gun deaths. They have things like gun licensing, gun buybacks, gun registration. And so in this book, I argue that's where we need to be. That's what we need to ask for if we want to, A, defeat the NRA, and then, B, really start saving lives in America. Yeah.
So step one, reduce the number of guns in circulation. Step two, deal with the NRA. What is the NRA these days? I remember the NRA from when I was a little kid. I mean, literally back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, as the organization that did, you know, training on safe firearms use. And in fact, I remember the early 1970s, the NRA was supportive of gun control legislation. What happened?
Well, you know, what really surprised me, Tom, is that that is certainly the public story, that right until 1977, when the NRA really had a revolution of leadership, that before then, that it was an association that believed in some sensible gun control. And that's true to a point. And that's to say that publicly, that's the image they portrayed. But what I learned in researching this book is that privately, what they told their membership was always the same. You know, I actually found evidence the first time the NRA came out against a gun control law was, I believe, in 1911 in New York. And then again, publicly they were saying one thing, but privately they were telling their membership that they have to write their lawmakers to oppose this measure because it would only take guns away from the good guys and leave the bad guys armed. And what happened in 77 is that those private messages and those public messages merged, and the NRA became what it is today. But this sense that, you know, that they at one point were this great hunting club, I think the narrative there is a little more complicated because politically the message has been the same.
Yeah. The modern day meme, and whenever I discuss guns on this program, I inevitably will get a call from somebody saying, well, you know, the founders wanted us to have guns. They put the Second Amendment in there in case the government ever became tyrannical so we could take down the government. I mean, after all, these were revolutionaries. They had taken down a government of their own, right, or, you know, that opposed them. And I have to point out to them that, you know, in all of James Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention, in all of Jefferson's letters, and I mean Hamilton's writings, you can go through. I mean, take your pick. There literally is no American history indicating, not a single one that I could find, indicating that any of the founders or framers thought that Americans should be armed to take down the government that they themselves were in the process of creating. But, you know, this story appears to have begun with an article in, I think it was 1974, in the American Rifleman, the NRA magazine, written by a teenager. Am I remembering that right?
Well, I don't know about the teenager piece, but what is certainly true is that this idea of the Second Amendment guaranteeing individual gun rights and thus superseding any kind of gun control laws, you're exactly right to point out that that's a very modern idea that came about in the 1970s because, you know, as this revolution was happening within the leadership, because what was happening before then is that the old NRA leaders would publicly write in their materials that the Second Amendment was of no use to them in trying to push their agenda. And that's because the consensus, both the legal consensus, the public consensus, the consensus within the Supreme Court for many, many, many years was that, as you point out, this was a right that was confined within a militia, right? It's how the Founding Fathers really thought about it. And it's also why you had a lot of colonies, and also as the country began to expand west, they had some pretty strict gun control laws because they too understood that where there are fewer guns, there are fewer gun deaths.
Right, right. It's pretty remarkable. We're talking with Igor Volsky. His new book is Guns Down: How to Defeat the NRA and Build a Safer Future with Fewer Guns. So how do we defeat the NRA, Igor?
Well, look, it's gonna take a long time. I'm under no illusion that we're going to be able to do this tomorrow. But look, step one is asking for what we really want and really building a movement in this country to vote people out of office who take dollars from the NRA, and really tap into the great support that you have in this country for things like licensing and registration. Step two is I talk a lot about in the book of looking at non-legislative strategies to defeat the NRA and also take on the gun industry. And what my organization did last week is that we launched a campaign, Tom, that's pushing the 15 largest banks to stop doing business with the gun industry until that industry can be fundamentally reformed. Because as you know, they made a business decision in the late 80s, early 90s to start producing weapons, militarized weapons for the civilian market. That gave us the popularization of the assault weapons, but also these military-style handguns. Folks are dying from wounds they were surviving generations before. And so, you know, we're always looking, and the book talks about this, looking at how can you find other actors in society, whether it be corporate America or other voices, to begin to change the conversation and the culture around guns so that you begin to give politicians the room to take on the lobby politically and to do that more directly. But it's going to be a long process. I wish I could tell you that there was some kind of magic switch, but there really isn't. They've been successful for so long. And if we're serious about it, and again, if we ask for what we want, which is fewer guns, we can get there sooner rather than later. Right.
Igor, back in the 1990s, there was, well, I remember actually back in the 80s, when I think the Pillar House restaurant in Boston was one of the very first restaurants, literally white tablecloth restaurants in the United States, to go entirely smoke-free. And it was slowly spreading through the late 80s and into the 90s. But then with these lawsuits and these pictures of diseased lungs, explicit photographs, really gross photographs coming out and being promoted in television ads and things by anti-tobacco groups, and then the lawsuits that showed the death, the carnage of cigarettes, The tobacco lobby went from, in 1995, being literally the most powerful lobby in Washington, D.C., to in 2005 being one of the least powerful. Might not a similar strategy, particularly showing pictures of the kind of damage that gunshots do? We've got this now hashtag movement, My Last Shot, that the kids, the now, teenage kids from Newtown have been promoting to please, if I'm killed with a gun, show the picture. Do what Emmett Till's mother did. What do you think about a cultural revolution that could change our take on guns as rapidly as happened with tobacco, completely independent of the political sphere?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tom. And that's the kind of strategy that I'm talking about, to really show people what guns do to the human body. And that's, by the way, as we unroll our banking campaign, we're going to integrate those kinds of strategies into it. But, a part of all of that is really reframing the conversation, because, for the last 20 years, and I just came back from Littleton, Colorado, the site of Columbine that occurred 20 years ago, believe it or not. Right. For those 20 years, our politicians and the gun control movement talked about, and still talks about, taking guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly in a country where 2/3 of the gun deaths are suicides. The way the rest of the world has solved this problem is that they've recognized that guns are the problem. Guns are inherently dangerous in any civilian hands, and we need to change the environment in which they're purchased by raising the standard of gun ownership. And that's how you keep everybody safe. And so the kinds of techniques that you're talking about are really showing people what gunshot wounds look like. That's really critical to reframing the way our leaders talk about this issue.